I never imagined that my 9-year-old daughter would be the one to save us both. That cold Tuesday morning at the police station, I sat there watching my ex-husband spin his lies to the officers, painting me as an unstable mother who had kidnapped our child. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I had made the decision to stay quiet, to not defend myself, because every time I had tried to speak up before, Callan had twisted my words and made me look crazy. But then Detective Kane asked to speak with Indy alone, and I watched my little girl walk into that interview room carrying her purple backpack like she did every day to school. I had no idea what was about to happen. I had no idea that inside that backpack was a small journal that would change everything. When they brought us back into the room 20 minutes later, Indy was sitting at the table with her diary open in front of her. Her voice was so calm, so matter-of-fact, when she looked up at the detective and said, "I wrote down everything Daddy did to us every night before I forgot. Mommy said we shouldn't talk about private family things, but I wanted to remember in case someone needed to know." That moment, seeing Callan's confident smirk disappear as Detective Kane started reading those carefully written entries, I realized that while I had been trying to protect my daughter by staying silent, she had been protecting both of us by speaking up in the only way she knew how. My name is Zara Moreau, and this is the story of how my daughter's courage saved us from a man who had convinced everyone, including me, that his version of the truth was the only one that mattered. Indy was 9 years old when she became our hero, and Callan Brooks was 35 when his perfect facade finally crumbled, thanks to a child's diary. Detective Finley Kane had seen cases like ours before, but she told me later that she had never seen a child document abuse with such precision and determination. What happened in that police station didn't just change our lives. It showed me that sometimes the people we think we're protecting are actually the ones protecting us. This is about what happens when a child refuses to let the truth stay hidden, even when the adults around her have given up on fighting for it. This is about the power of writing down what matters, even when you're too young to understand why it matters. And this is about learning that sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. 6 months before that life-changing day at the police station, I thought I had finally escaped. Indy and I were living in a small 2-bedroom apartment across town, far enough from our old neighborhood that I didn't run into Callan's friends at the grocery store or worry about him showing up unannounced. The walls were thin and the carpet was worn, but it was ours. For the first time in years, I could breathe without calculating whether my next words would set him off. I had been working as a freelance graphic designer, taking on small projects for local businesses and spending late nights designing logos and brochures while Indy slept. The money was tight, but it was honest work that I could do from home. No more asking Callan for permission to spend money on groceries. No more hiding purchases or explaining why I needed new art supplies for work. The freedom felt intoxicating, even when I was surviving on coffee and 3 hours of sleep. Indy had adjusted to our new life with the resilience that children somehow possess. She helped me organize our tiny kitchen, arranged her books on the makeshift shelves I had built from cinder blocks and boards, and never once complained about sharing the living room as my office space. She would do her homework at the kitchen table while I worked on my laptop, both of us content in our quiet companionship. Sometimes I would catch her watching me with those serious brown eyes, and I wondered what she was thinking, but she always smiled when I looked her way. To everyone else, Callan had been the perfect husband and father. He sold luxury homes for the biggest real estate firm in our town, volunteered as an assistant coach for the Little League team, and never missed a church service on Sunday. Our neighbors loved him. He remembered everyone's names, helped elderly Mrs. Patterson with her groceries, and organized the annual block party. When we were out together, he would put his arm around my waist and call me his beautiful wife, with such convincing warmth that even I sometimes forgot what happened behind closed doors. But in private, Callan controlled everything. He decided what we ate, what shows we watched, which friends I was allowed to see. He monitored my phone, questioned every expense, and had convinced me that my opinions were stupid and my emotions were overreactions. The physical abuse had started small, a squeeze of my arm that left bruises hidden by long sleeves, a shove that he immediately apologized for, claiming work stress. By the time it escalated, I had already been trained to believe that I was the problem. The psychological manipulation was worse than the bruises. Callan had a gift for making me doubt my own reality. He would say something cruel and then deny it happened. He would break something and convince me I had done it. He would scream at Indy for normal child behavior and then comfort her, positioning himself as her protector from my unreasonable expectations. I started questioning my own memory, my own sanity. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I did provoke him. Maybe I was lucky that someone like him even loved someone like me. After I left, I convinced myself that staying quiet during custody exchanges was the smart strategy. Callan got Indy every other weekend, as ordered by the court, and I would bite my tongue when she came home quieter than usual. I told myself that if I just followed the rules perfectly, if I never gave him ammunition to use against me, eventually he would lose interest in tormenting us. I believed that keeping the peace was protecting Indy from seeing her parents fight. Indy had always been mature for her age, but after the divorce, she became almost protective of me. She would make me coffee in the mornings before school using the step stool to reach the cabinet. She would ask if I had eaten lunch and remind me to drink water when I got absorbed in work projects. Sometimes after difficult custody exchanges, when Callan had made some cutting remark about my appearance or my parenting, Indy would curl up next to me on the couch and pat my arm without saying anything. I had noticed that she started writing in a journal before bed every night. It was a small notebook with a purple cover that she had picked out at the dollar store. I thought it was sweet, maybe something her teacher had suggested for improving her writing skills. She would sit cross-legged on her bed, pencil moving carefully across the pages, her tongue poking out slightly the way it did when she concentrated. When I asked what she was writing about, she would say, "Just stuff," or "things I want to remember." I never pushed for details because I wanted her to have something that was entirely her own. Looking back, I realized that while I was trying to create a safe, quiet life for us, Indy was watching everything with the sharp awareness that children develop when they grow up too fast. She was processing our trauma in ways I never imagined, preparing for possibilities that I was too exhausted to consider. The call came on a Thursday morning while I was designing a menu for a local cafe. My phone buzzed with an unknown number, and when I answered, a stern voice identified herself as Officer Martinez from the police department. "Ms. Moreau, we need you to come to the station immediately regarding your daughter, Indy. There's been a report filed, and we need to speak with both of you as soon as possible." My blood turned to ice. "A report? What kind of report? Is she okay?" "She's fine, ma'am, but we can't discuss details over the phone. Please bring identification and come to the main station on 5th Street. Ask for Detective Kane when you arrive." I hung up and immediately called Indy's school. She was there, safe in her classroom. But the knot in my stomach told me this had everything to do with Callan. I picked her up early, telling the office there was a family emergency, and drove to the police station with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Indy sat quietly in the passenger seat, her purple backpack clutched in her lap. "Are we in trouble, Mommy?" she asked, her voice small but steady. "I don't know, sweetheart, but whatever happens, just tell the truth, okay?" When we walked into the police station, I saw him immediately. Callan was sitting in the waiting area wearing his best suit, the charcoal gray one he saved for important client meetings. Next to him sat a man I didn't recognize, clearly a lawyer based on his expensive briefcase and the way he was taking notes. Callan looked up when we entered, and his expression was perfect concerned father mixed with wounded ex-husband. I had seen that look 1,000 times before. "Zara," he said, standing up with his hands spread in a gesture of helpless frustration. "I'm so glad you're here. We need to talk about what's best for Indy." Detective Kane appeared before I could respond. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail. She introduced herself and led us to a conference room where Callan and his lawyer were already seated. The detective placed a file folder on the table and looked directly at me. "Ms. Moreau, your ex-husband has filed a report claiming that you've been engaging in parental alienation and that you violated the custody agreement by keeping Indy from him. He's also expressed concerns about your mental stability and your fitness as a parent." I felt the room spinning. This was exactly what I had feared, what I had tried so hard to prevent by staying quiet and following every rule. Callan leaned forward, his voice filled with what sounded like genuine anguish. Detective Kane, I love my daughter more than anything in this world, but Zara has been poisoning her against me. Indy used to be excited about our weekends together, and now she barely speaks to me. She flinches when I try to hug her. Zara has filled her head with lies about our marriage, about me. I have witnesses who can testify to Zara's erratic behavior, her anger issues, her inability to co-parent effectively. His lawyer slid a stack of papers across the table. We have documentation of Ms. Moreau's concerning behavior, text messages where she's hostile and uncooperative, statements from neighbors who've witnessed her emotional outbursts, photos of Indy looking distressed after visits with her mother. I stared at the papers, knowing that every piece of evidence had been carefully crafted or taken out of context. The text messages were probably my responses to his manipulative games. The neighbor statements were likely from his friends, who had never questioned his perfect husband act. The photos of Indy looking distressed were probably taken after his visits with her, not mine. Detective Kane was watching me carefully. Ms. Moreau, how do you respond to these allegations? This was the moment I had dreaded. If I defended myself, I would sound exactly like the unstable ex-wife Callan was describing. If I explained the truth about our marriage, about his abuse, I would look like someone trying to destroy a good father's reputation out of spite. Every word I said could be twisted and used against me. I've never violated the custody agreement, I said quietly. I've never prevented Indy from seeing her father. I follow the court order exactly. Callan shook his head sadly. Detective, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Zara can't even acknowledge that there's a problem. She's so focused on punishing me that she can't see how it's affecting our daughter. Indy needs help, and she needs stability. I'm genuinely worried about what might happen if this continues. Indy had been sitting silently beside me throughout this exchange, her backpack still clutched in her small hands. I could feel her tension, the way she was holding herself very still, the way she did when Callan was building up to one of his explosions. I wanted to protect her from this, from having to hear her father paint me as a dangerous person, but I felt completely powerless. The trap Callan had set was perfect, and I was walking right into it. Detective Kane studied the papers in front of her, then looked between Callan and me. I could see her processing everything, trying to determine who was telling the truth. This was the crucial moment where I had to make a choice that would determine whether I got to keep my daughter or lost her forever. Every instinct I had developed over years of living with Callan told me to stay quiet. Defending myself had always backfired. Whenever I tried to explain his behavior to friends or family, I ended up sounding paranoid and bitter. He was too good at twisting situations, at making my reactions seem disproportionate to whatever he claimed had happened. He would do something cruel and then act bewildered by my response, as if I was overreacting to nothing. Ms. Moreau, Detective Kane said, I need to understand your perspective on these allegations. Your ex-husband is claiming that you've been interfering with his relationship with Indy. Can you tell me about the custody exchanges? How do they typically go? I took a breath, trying to find words that wouldn't make me sound defensive or vindictive. I follow the court order exactly. I have Indy ready when he arrives. I don't ask questions about their time together unless she volunteers information. I've never missed a scheduled exchange or prevented him from seeing her. Callan's lawyer made a note on his pad. Callan himself looked disappointed, as if my reasonable response was just further evidence of my deception. But what about Indy's behavior? Callan interjected. Surely you've noticed how withdrawn she's become after our visits, how she seems afraid of me now. That didn't happen on its own, Zara. This was the trap. If I acknowledged that Indy sometimes seemed upset after visits with him, it would look like I was criticizing his parenting. If I denied it, I would seem oblivious to my own daughter's emotional state. Either way, he could use my answer against me. Indy adjusts to transitions the way most children do, I said carefully. Divorce is hard on kids. Moving between two homes is hard. Detective Kane was watching me closely, and I had the sense that she was seeing something I wasn't saying. Mr. Brooks, can you give me some specific examples of this parental alienation you're describing? Callan straightened in his chair, clearly prepared for this question. She's taught Indy to be afraid of physical affection. When I try to hug my daughter, she tenses up. She won't sit on my lap anymore. She used to love when I would carry her around, and now she asks me to put her down immediately. Zara has obviously told her that I'm dangerous somehow. I've never told Indy that her father is dangerous, I said, which was technically true. I had never used those words. Then why is she so uncomfortable around me? Callan's voice rose slightly, and for just a moment, I caught a glimpse of the anger he usually kept hidden in public. Why does she flinch when I reach for her? Children don't develop those reactions unless someone teaches them to. Detective Kane made a note. I think it would be helpful if I spoke with Indy separately. Sometimes children are more comfortable sharing their feelings when they're not worried about upsetting their parents. My heart started pounding. This was exactly what I had been afraid of. Indy was 9 years old. She had spent years learning to navigate Callan's moods, learning to say what he wanted to hear. What if she was too scared to tell the truth? What if she had absorbed his version of events? What if Detective Kane misinterpreted her responses? That's an excellent idea, Callan said quickly. I think you'll find that Indy has been coached to say certain things about me. But children want to tell the truth when they feel safe to do so. Even his agreement with the detective sounded reasonable and cooperative. He was positioning himself as the parent who had nothing to hide, while making me look like someone who might be afraid of what my daughter would say. Detective Kane looked at me. Ms. Moreau, are you comfortable with me speaking to Indy alone? I had no choice. Refusing would make me look like I was hiding something. Of course. I want Indy to feel free to say whatever she needs to say. But as I watched Detective Kane lead my daughter out of the conference room, her small hand clutching that purple backpack, I felt like I was watching my whole world walk away. I had no idea what Indy would say. I had no idea if she would be brave enough to tell the truth or if she would be too scared of the consequences. Callan sat back in his chair with a satisfied expression. His lawyer was already organizing papers, probably preparing for the next phase of whatever legal strategy they had planned. I was completely at their mercy, and they knew it. All I could do was wait and hope that somehow the truth would be enough. Detective Kane led Indy to a smaller room down the hall, one with soft lighting and child-sized furniture that was clearly designed to make young witnesses feel comfortable. Through the one-way glass, I could see them sitting across from each other at a low table. Detective Kane had brought a box of crayons and some paper, creating an environment that felt more like a casual conversation than an interrogation. Meanwhile, Callan and his lawyer remained in the conference room with me. But the dynamic had shifted. Callan was no longer performing his concerned father routine with quite the same intensity. Instead, he was checking his phone and making small talk with his lawyer about weekend golf plans, as if this whole situation was just a minor inconvenience that would be resolved in his favor shortly. You know, Zara, he said without looking up from his phone, this could all be so much simpler if you would just be reasonable. Indy needs stability. She needs a father who can provide for her properly. I'm not trying to hurt you, I'm trying to help our daughter. Even now, even here, he couldn't resist the urge to make me feel like I was the problem. His lawyer cleared his throat softly, probably signaling him to stay quiet, but Callan had never been able to resist an opportunity to remind me how powerless I was. In the other room, I watched Detective Kane pull out a notepad and pen. She was talking to Indy in a gentle voice, asking her about school, about her favorite subjects, about her friends. Indy was answering politely but briefly, the way she always did with adults she didn't know well. Her backpack sat beside her chair, and she kept glancing at it. Indy, can you tell me about living with your mom? Detective Kane asked. Do you like your new apartment? Indy nodded. It's nice. We have our own rooms, and Mommy lets me help cook dinner. She's teaching me to make pancakes that look like Mickey Mouse. That sounds fun. And what about when you visit your dad? Do you enjoy your time with him? This was the moment I had been dreading. Indy's face became very serious, and she was quiet for a long moment. She looked toward the one-way mirror as if she could sense that we were watching, then back at Detective Kane. It's okay, she said finally. We watch movies and stuff. Detective Kane leaned forward slightly. Indy, Is there anything you want to tell me about your family? Sometimes kids have feelings or thoughts that they don't know how to share with grown-ups. Indy looked down at her hands, then at her backpack. Something shifted in her posture, and she reached for the bag with sudden determination. Actually, she said, her voice becoming clearer and more confident, I do have something. She unzipped her backpack and pulled out the small purple journal I had seen her writing in every night. She placed it on the table between herself and Detective Kane, her small hands flat on the cover. I wrote down everything Daddy did to us every night before I forgot, she said, her voice steady but quiet. Mommy said we shouldn't talk about private family things, but I wanted to remember in case someone needed to know. Detective Kane's expression became very focused. Can you tell me what kinds of things you wrote down? Indy opened the journal to a page near the beginning. Her handwriting was careful and precise, the way it gets when children are concentrating hard on forming their letters correctly. Like when Daddy yelled at Mommy and made her cry, and when he grabbed her arm really tight and she had purple marks, and when he told her she was stupid and no one would ever believe her if she tried to leave him. Indy flipped through several pages. I wrote down the dates too because my teacher says dates are important when you're telling about something that happened. In the conference room, I watched Callan's face change. The confident mask slipped, and for a moment he looked genuinely shocked. His lawyer was leaning forward, trying to see through the glass. Detective Kane was carefully turning pages in the journal, reading entries that detailed months of psychological and physical abuse from the perspective of a child who had been far more aware than any of us realized. Each entry was dated and detailed. March 15th. Daddy pushed Mommy and she hit the wall. She said she was okay, but she was holding her shoulder funny. March 22nd. Daddy said Mommy was crazy and that's why nobody likes her. Mommy went to the bathroom and I heard her crying. Indy, Detective Kane said gently, this is very important information. Can you tell me why you decided to write these things down? Indy looked directly at the detective with those serious brown eyes. Because Daddy always said things didn't happen the way Mommy remembered. But I remembered too, and I thought maybe if I wrote it down, then someone would believe us if we ever needed help. The room fell completely silent except for the sound of Detective Kane turning pages, reading months of documented abuse that none of the adults had known was being recorded. Detective Kane called us back into the conference room 20 minutes later, and the atmosphere had completely changed. She was holding Indy's journal in her hands, and her expression was serious and determined. Callan's lawyer was whispering urgently in his ear, but Callan himself looked pale and shaken. The confident, charming facade he had maintained throughout the entire ordeal was gone. Mr. Brooks, Detective Kane said, setting the journal on the table, I've reviewed the documentation that your daughter has been keeping. These entries detail specific incidents of domestic violence, emotional abuse, and threatening behavior. They include dates, times, and direct quotes that paint a very different picture than the one you've presented today. Callan tried to recover his composure. Detective, you can't seriously be considering the imaginative writings of a 9-year-old as evidence of anything. Children make up stories. They misinterpret adult conversations. Indy has obviously been influenced by her mother's version of events. But Detective Kane had seen enough cases like this to recognize the difference between a coached child and a child telling the truth. Mr. Brooks, these aren't imaginative stories. These are detailed, factual accounts written by a child who was documenting what she witnessed. The level of specificity and consistency is not something a 9-year-old could fabricate or be coached to create. She opened the journal to a page near the middle. For example, your daughter wrote about an incident on April 8th, where you told her mother that she was worthless and no court would ever believe her lies. She documented that her mother had a bruise on her upper arm that she tried to hide with makeup. These aren't the kinds of details that children invent. Callan's lawyer was frantically taking notes, but I could see that even he was realizing their case was falling apart. The evidence was undeniable, written in a child's careful handwriting and documented over months of abuse that I thought I had successfully hidden from Indy. Furthermore, Detective Kane continued, your allegations about parental alienation take on a very different meaning when viewed in the context of a child who is protecting herself and her mother from documented abuse. Indy's reluctance to engage in physical affection with you isn't the result of coaching from her mother. It's a natural response to trauma. Within an hour, Detective Kane had placed Callan under arrest for domestic violence and child endangerment. I watched in shocked silence as they read him his rights and led him away in handcuffs. His lawyer was already on his phone, probably arranging bail, but the damage was done. The truth was finally out, documented in purple ink by the bravest person I knew. That was 8 months ago. Callan eventually pleaded guilty to avoid a trial that would have put Indy through the ordeal of testifying. He received a restraining order, lost all custody rights, and was ordered to attend anger management classes and domestic violence counseling. The journal that Indy had so carefully maintained became the key piece of evidence that protected us legally and ensured our safety. The months that followed weren't easy. Indy started seeing a child therapist who specialized in trauma, and we both had to learn how to process what we had been through. But slowly, we began to heal. Indy learned that while her instinct to document the abuse had been incredibly smart and brave, it wasn't a child's responsibility to gather evidence against an abusive parent. She learned that adults should handle adult problems, and that her job was just to be a kid. I started speaking at domestic violence support groups, sharing our story with other women who were trapped in similar situations. I tell them about the power of believing children, about recognizing that kids are often more aware of family dynamics than we give them credit for. I tell them that sometimes the truth finds a way to surface, even when we think we're doing a good job of hiding it. Most importantly, I learned that my attempts to protect Indy by staying quiet had actually put both of us in more danger. Children see everything, they hear everything, and they process trauma in ways that adults often underestimate. Indy had been protecting both of us by speaking up in the only way she felt safe to do so. Today, Indy is 10 years old and thriving. She still writes in journals, but now they're filled with stories about her friends, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian, and her excitement about our upcoming move to a bigger apartment. She's learned that her voice matters, that telling the truth is always the right choice, and that sometimes the smallest people can make the biggest difference. If you're watching this and you're in a situation like mine, please know that the truth has a way of coming out, often through the most unexpected sources. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths, and sometimes staying quiet isn't protecting anyone. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment about your own experiences, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, survival, and hope. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.